welcome to Music Theory Lesson 2 here on the Internet Music Academy, the free, comprehensive online resource where anyone can learn how music works. In Lesson 1, we talked about what sound is and what musical notes are. In Lesson 2, we will be talking about musical intervals, or the distance between two notes. Let's start off by adding on to our knowledge from Lesson 1. In Lesson 1, we learned that each musical note correlates to a specific frequency, such as the A above middle C, which vibrates at 440 Hz. We know that the frequency increases or decreases by a factor of 2 every time that we move by 1 octave. But because we don't actually perceive these changes as exponential, we can also divide each octave into a unit called cents, just like money in the United States. The distance between any two adjacent notes, for example C and C sharp, spans 100 cents, or what is commonly called a half step or a semitone. This means that each octave, which contains 12 half steps, is the same as 1200 cents. As you might guess, if we have half steps, we also have whole steps. A whole step, also called a whole tone, is equal to 200 cents, and occurs when we skip over one note, for example, C to D, skipping over C sharp. This is the first way to think about the distance between notes. How many steps apart are they? Here's an example. How many steps apart are C and F? These two notes are 2.5 steps apart, or 5 semitones. This C and the C above it are 12 half steps apart. Now, a more common way of referring to these distances, rather than counting out the number of half steps, comes from musical scales, which are patterns of half and whole steps that are used to create melodies, or what you might think of as the part of a song that you can sing along to. We will cover scales more in depth in a future lesson, but for now we are going to use a scale called C major. The C major scale starts on C and goes up the white keys of the piano to the next C, skipping all of the black keys. There are 8 notes total, including the C at the top of the scale. Now that we have established this, we can name notes based on numbers taken from this scale. For example, C to D is a second, because we have gone up to the second note of the scale. C to E is a third, because E is the third note of the scale. C to F is a fourth, C to G is a fifth, C to A is a sixth, C to B is a seventh, and C to C, as we have mentioned before, is not called an eighth, but rather an octave. The word octave really means eighth, though, because it has the prefix oct in it. What other words have oct in them? Octagon, which has 8 sides like a stop sign. October, which used to be the 8th month of the year in the historic Roman calendar. And octopus, which has 8 legs. But what about the black keys? How would you name those? Well, similar to adding sharps and flats to our note names like we talked about in Lesson 1, we can also add something to the interval names to account for the fact that there are actually 12 semitones, but only 7 names of these intervals. When naming intervals in our C major scale, we can add the word minor to an interval name to bring it down 1 half step or semitone to a black key. For example, C to E flat would be a minor third because it is 1 semitone down from E, the third note of the scale. C to D flat would be a minor second, and C to A flat would be a minor sixth, and C to B flat would be a minor seventh. Now, because we need to distinguish a minor interval from a normal interval, we need to add the word major to our original intervals that have corresponding minors. So in our C major scale, C to D would actually be a major second, and C to E is a major third, not just a third, and so on. There are 3 intervals that do not get named as major or minor, however. These are the 4th, the 5th, and the interval that falls right between the two. The 4th, C to F, and the 5th, C to G, are called perfect because of the way that their frequencies mathematically align. Now, the distance from C to F sharp, which is 6 half steps or 3 whole steps, is called a tritone. It is also referred to as an augmented fourth, meaning to go up a half step from the fourth, or as a diminished fifth, meaning to go down a half step from the fifth. It's easy for all of this information to get a little bit convoluted, but I wanted you to see how we arrive at all of these different names for different intervals. So to summarize all of them, here's a chart that shows the way in which the system of major and minor intervals correlates to the number of half steps between two notes. You will notice that minor intervals are labeled with lowercase m's, major intervals are labeled with uppercase m's, perfect intervals, fourths and fifths, are labeled as P4 or P5, and tritones are labeled as TT. Finally, before we wrap things up, there is one more concept relating to intervals that you should be aware of at this time. This is the difference between harmonic and melodic intervals. This distinguishes between two notes played at the same time versus two notes that are played consecutively. Two notes played at the same time would be deemed harmonic, a derivative of the word harmony. So if two people are singing a harmony, they're singing multiple notes at the same time. So here's a harmonic major third, C to E. Two notes played at different times are referred to as melodic intervals from the word melody. A melody is a long string of notes that create, in many cases, a song or a tune that you could sing along with, and only one note is happening at a time. Here is a melodic major third, also C to E. So to recap this lesson, an interval is a measure of the distance between two notes. The two ways we can do this is by counting the number of semitones, a 12-note system of naming the distance, or by the octave system of naming notes, which relies on the words major and minor to create all the possible distances between the 12 semitones within one octave. Also, intervals can be either melodic or harmonic, depending on if they are played separately or together. In Lesson 3, we will begin learning about musical notation, or how music is written. If you find this course to be helpful, be sure to like and subscribe to make sure you don't miss any new content. If what you learned here today has made you a better musician, please also consider becoming a patron of the Internet Music Academy for as little as $1 a month on our Patreon page. Link also in the description. Have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.